I'm Andrea Green, Director of the Visiting Artist Program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to SAC's Distinguished Alumni Lecture Series featuring Diane Simpson. Established in 2006 in partnership with SAC's Office of Alumni Relations, the semi-annual series has featured talented alumni such as Paul Chan, Sanford Biggers, Tanya Bruguera, Trevor Paglen, Jeff Koons, Sarah Vowell, and Tom Kalin, among others. Since 1866, SAC has been a leader in educating the world's most influential artists, designers, and scholars. Throughout its 150th year history, SAC has redefined the cultural landscape and influenced contemporary art and design throughout the world. We are very proud that Diane Simpson is part of our rich legacy, and I would like to thank her for sharing her work with us this evening. You can see Diane's work in person at the MCA, where she currently has an exhibition on view through July 3rd. You can also find her work at Corbett versus Dempsey here in Chicago and JTT Gallery in New York, as well as in numerous collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago. After the lecture, we'll take a few questions from the audience. Our staff will have microphones circulating for your use, so please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. So thank you for joining us, and now I'd like to welcome to the podium James Yude, Adjunct Professor in SAC's Department of Art History, Theory, and Criticism, and Chair of the New Arts Journalism Program. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Andrea, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Andrea, for a remarkable year of programming here at the School of the Art Institute, from Jeff Koons to tonight and Sophie Cal coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm going to follow her after the lecture. All right. Those of my students who don't know what I mean by that, see me after the lecture. But thanks so much for the great programming you put together this year. It's my pleasure having the opportunity to introduce Diane Simpson this evening as a distinguished alumni. And I'd like to begin by noting that Diane has experienced these last couple of years a fairly interesting recent phenomenon. It's been heartening to see the recent resurgence of interest in Chicago art and artists in the past few years. From coast to coast, artists such as Ed Paschke, Roger Brown, Barbara Rossi, Philip Hansen, Ray Yoshida, Sue Ellen Roca coming up, and tonight, speaker Diane Simpson. In the last 2 years, she has had one-person shows in Berlin, London, 2 in New York, and a retrospective in Boston, which just closed last week, and in Chicago, too, at her home base here, Corbett versus Dempsey. This growth of interest in her and in other Chicago artists is great and interests me, of course, but just a little bit, I feel a sense of frustration about it, as these artists have been working at a very high order all along, hiding in plain sight, if you will. But better late than never, and it is important for Diane to share her vision with the world, so much the better. And Diane Simpson received her BA and MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in the 1970s and has enjoyed a 35-year career as one of the subtlest sculptors and draftspersons in our community. She had a retrospective at the Chicago Cultural Center in 2010, and another, as I mentioned, just closed at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston a week ago. She is represented by Corbett versus Dempsey here in here in Chicago, and at JTT Gallery in New York, and has exhibited her work in exhibitions from coast to coast. If I might, I'd like to read a paragraph from an essay I wrote for her in 1995 for an exhibition at the College of DuPage in Glen Allen, a gallery that's now named for an old friend of many of us here, the Cleve Carney Gallery. So I wrote this. I could read my stuff all day. So here's just a paragraph. Simpson weaves quite a web. Her art in many ways is an inquiry into the architecture and architectonics of fashion design. She deconstructs and then reconstructs. She reduces and then expands, and she reaches simultaneously for the core and for the embellishment. If Simpson begins, say, with a piece of head garb, as she does in Shaker Bonnet from 1990, her subsequent alterations of it take it on a journey that sometimes seem quite afield from where she began. She stretches angles, refocuses rhythms, changes scales, rethinks materials, and eschews functionality, while all along maintaining, even enhancing, poetic connections with her starting motif. Simpson doesn't abstract her source material as much as enhancingly permute it, taking it toward new design possibilities, ever extrapolating while ever sensitive to its fundamental essence. She ends up with a bonnet that can never be worn, but that functions as an incredible visual immersion into bonnethood, into thinking about the rhythms and textures and possibilities residing in an article once worn around a woman's head. Well, let's hear from the artist herself, because it is my very great pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming back in this anniversary year, back to this stage, one of our own, Diane Simpson.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Jim. I enjoyed hearing that essay again. I loved it when you did it, and now I'm loved it again, hearing it. I am truly honored by the invitation to participate in the celebration of SAIC's 150th anniversary. The School of the Art Institute certainly has played a major role in my development. Along with the Art Institute Museum and the contacts I've had over the years with this broad and multi-talented local arts community, making it really a joy to live and work in the Chicago area. My decision to choose art as a career was actually made in high school. That's when my mother would put me on the train every Saturday morning to travel from Joliet to Chicago to attend junior school life drawing classes with Mr. Jacobson at the Art Institute. Also attending the class were inspiring classmates like Richard Hunt and Irving Petlin. At that time, in the 1950s, the school was in the lower level of the museum. The museum and the school were so physically connected, I seem to remember an adrenaline rush, smelling the turpentine as I entered the front doors of the museum. After high school, I spent 2 years majoring in art at the University of Illinois in Urbana, and then transferred to SAIC in 1955. This was the beginning of a very long, drawn-out love affair with SAIC that lasted over a 23-year period, during which time I was also raising a family. I finally received my MFA in 1978. That extended period of at SAIC allowed me to benefit from a range of amazing teachers, including Kathleen Blackshear, Paul Wiegart, Whitney Halstead, Tom Kopsalis, Ted Halkin, Ray Yoshida, and Barbara Rossi. During my undergraduate years, I concentrated on painting and drawing, and I was primarily interested in the human figure as subject, a subject continuing to indirectly enter my work now. I also loved art history classes and taking trips to sketch objects at the Field Museum. I think these experiences have led to my interest and reliance on a multitude of visual sources as a way of approaching and inventing form. I depend on visual sources in the form of photographs that I've saved from books or found on the web or photographed myself. A specific image will be the catalyst for a new form for a specific sculpture. I'm also influenced by sources that reflect certain principles running through all of my work. My first few images will point to these issues. The remaining slides will show examples of my sculptures and working drawings, along with sources that directed particular pieces. These photographs by Bernhard and Hyla Becker, documenting industrial structures, have been a continuous source of inspiration for me since I first discovered them in a show at the Art Institute in the 70s. They were published in a book called Anonymous Sculpture. The cooling tower on the left and the lime kilns on the right were planned by engineers or anonymous architects. The strength and beauty of their design is a natural outcome of a process based on functional and structural considerations. The surface details are interdependent with the shape, structure, and function of the object, a principle that has been important throughout my own work. In the top photo of a Japanese inn, the patterns created by the roof tiles and the cotton kimonos hanging out to dry are not arbitrary, but dependent upon placement, shape, and repetition. Similarly, the pattern of lines on the Italian buildings shown below echo the contours of the structure of the building. I'm interested in the tilted oblique perspective of this 17th century Turkish painting on the left. The shallow space, the bird's eye view, feels immediate and at the same time strange and ambiguous. In my last year of graduate school in the painting department, I was making drawings of objects like the one on the right. This one is based on Indian cradle boards. I had devised a way to describe three-dimensional forms similar to that early perspective, using parallel lines going back in space at a 45-degree angle. I was encouraged to start constructing three-dimensional forms based on these drawings. The top photo shows me in 1979 installing my cardboard constructions at Artemisia Gallery. Artemisia was a women's co-op gallery I joined as soon as I graduated from SAIC. I chose Tri-Wall, a triple-layered corrugated cardboard, and cut the cardboard using a knife-edged blade in a jigsaw. The individual sections were slotted and interlocked, a practical solution for easier transporting and storing. I thought of these constructions as drawings in space, and I applied the same 45-degree angles I used in the drawings to these forms that extended into actual space. In the bottom photo, the wall construction, second from the front, has a strange shape seen in the photo because we're viewing it from the left, and the intended view was to view it straight on, the same view as in the drawing. The image on the left is that same piece seen from the, quote, correct view, the view similar to the drawing. The long form that extends downward is totally flat, but shaded and shaped to appear bent. On the right, with leaning lookout, I extended the idea of constructed drawing further by connecting it to the floor. Eventually, I brought the constructions away from the wall to stand on their own, but they continued to be oriented spatially at a 45-degree angle from the back to the front. When photographed, they appear more spatially normal, which is a frustrating phenomena. For ribbed kimono, I used a multi-layered archival cardboard made with acid-free paper. I rubbed crayon over the surface, bringing out the pattern of the interior flutes. The interior fluting also served as a means for connecting two sections with wood dowels. The back view detail shows the obi, the area on the back of the kimono. I also stripped off the top layer, as you can see in that photo, to reveal the interior fluting. This installation group of work is made with MDF, or medium density fiberboard, a wood product made of densely glued wood particles. Unlike the corrugated cardboard, the MDF did not have an existing pattern inherent to the material. So for each sculpture, before cutting out a particular shape, I would initially cover the entire 4 by 8 foot surface with a slotted pattern using a router tool. Up to now, cutting cardboard didn't raise too much dust, so my studio had been in my dining room. But I was forced out of the house and into the garage once I started cutting MDF. I was interested in the construction of Japanese armor, in the slotted openings and how the individual sections of armor are connected with cords going through those openings. For Samurai 6, I made a pattern similar to those slotted openings. The curved area represents the armor skirt shape when it's on the body. This piece is angled at a 45 degrees angle, similar to the cardboard pieces. Consequently, each section of the skirt became a slightly different trapezoid shape. I shaded the color on the area to emphasize the curve of the form, a holdover from my painting days. I've always been fascinated by the shapes of electrical towers, how the shapes look anthropomorphic and they change dramatically as they're viewed from a passing car window. This piece reminds me of those towers, but I also connect the shape to traditional Japanese trousers. The color tones for this piece were determined by the topography of the surface. My process was similar to wiping ink off of a printing plate. I applied an oil stain to the entire surface, then wiped it off, allowing the grooved lines to retain more color. The vertical lines from all the sections line up with only when the viewer stands in front of the piece at exactly the right spot, a similar experience to the electrical tower experience. This group I call my historical group, and Court Lady was sort of a transition piece from the samurai into the historical group. Similar to the previous armor group, the sections of Court Lady are slotted and connected with cords. This is the first overall curvilinear form, but when it's disassembled, the piece actually consists of two flat sections. Part of each section is made from individual strips of wood glued to a backing of canvas, similar to the construction of a timbre desk top or a door. Each of these sections curves around and meets the solid area of the other section. They are then held in place with cords going through slots and fastened on the inside with plastic toggles. As with former works, this one too is oriented in space at a 45-degree angle. The drawing for Court Lady explains how the piece looks when flattened out. However, what you're looking at really looks like one big piece, and it's actually two separate sections. I wanted the form of this sculpture to suggest an elegant flowing robe. The base section becomes an extension of the skirt section, like a skirt that flows down onto the floor. I have shown this piece both ways, with and without the base. It's sort of optional. The wood furniture buttons create a texture that reminds me of a fabric called dotted Swiss that I used in 8th grade sewing class to make my graduation dress. To disassemble the sculpture, specific buttons can be removed to access the screws that are underneath. I put an oil stain on the surface so that the MDF color and texture comes through. I wanted it to sort of feel like a drawing rather than a painting. I also put colored pencil The orange section that you're seeing is colored pencil. And the image on the right is a skewed view of this same piece. So if I had shown enough photographs, you probably would have seen a typical skewed view for all of these other pieces that are angled. For my source here, I was looking at the farthingale, or it's sometimes called a pannier. A farthingale is a structure that women wore around their waist underneath their extremely wide skirts in the mid-18th century. It was made of whalebone or cane with linen hinge tapes that collapsed the structure, enabling a woman to pass through a wide doorway, pass through a doorway with her wide skirt. Underskirt began with an interest in this form and worked its way down to the floor. Because of the complicated structure of underskirt, its angles extending in 3 directions, I began using glue and a system of joints to permanently assemble it. This cape drawing shows the process of how I actually constructed the piece, and it's very abstracted. The form morphs from the original organic clothing source to a much more architectural form, allowing me to clearly see how to build it. The final form often becomes quite removed from the original source image. I depend completely on the drawing for guidance. I never start constructing the sculpture until I see in the drawing formal qualities that I trust as being very strong. The construction of cape is quite linear. It was sort of my way of creating volume without any real solid material, sort of depicting a very curvilinear form without the curve, except for the curved shape at the bottom of the piece. Cape became so linear and reduced, I decided that suspending the sculpture at shoulder height would help to connect it again to the viewer's body. Also, raising it up also emphasized the bottom shape, which was my favorite area. This is the beginning of the headgear, what I call headgear series. The image source for this sculpture came from an exhibition catalog of Japanese samurai helmets. Sections of smooth and embossed aluminum cover a wood armature. I first discovered this type of material called soffit aluminum in a neighbor's dumpster. It was left over from a repair job on the eaves of their roof. I chose to incorporate the red cord as a softening or domestic touch, and because also cords are a prominent feature on Japanese helmets. I chose brass tubing for this asymmetrical grid construction. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong. What's going on here? Sorry. Wait a minute. Well, I'm out of line here, but I'll catch up. Anyway, this piece is called Formal Wear, and it's the exaggerated shape of the woman's cuffs was what was the impetus for this particular piece. Formal wear in its early stage of development didn't look very much like sleeves at all. They sort of looked like mechanical forms. And it was only when I arranged them on a hanger and suspended them that they connoted the idea of sleeves. The forms are made of a non-woven industrial material similar to Tyvek, but opaque and much thicker. I glued 4 layers together for this piece. The left and right sleeves face toward each other, each one at a 45-degree angle. My form and fabric choices for muff began with an image that you see collaged onto the drawing on the left. The faux fur and fleece represent a modernized version of the ermine sleeves in the photo. A Japanese friend made a comment that I really liked. She thought this sculpture connoted the old and the new Japan, a combination of traditional formality with contemporary funk. The hanger is carved from mahogany. It angles downward and also to the right at about 60 degrees. This source image is from a set of books illustrating costume, household items, and architectural elements from the 12th to the 19th century. This partial sleeve, already in abstract form, is further abstracted when exaggerated in scale, removed from the body, and made of wood and window screen. So I felt suspending it on the stand would reassign its role as some sort of wearable attire. I consider placement early in my process. Decisions are based on structural needs like scale and weight, and also connotations related to the form. This begins the group I call aprons. The installation reminded me of a gathering of people standing around at a cocktail party. It was important that the lower sections that extended to the floor would be completely integrated with the upper apron section and an integral part of the piece rather than like a separate stand. For apron 3, I chose a high-gloss cream and green color that connoted memories from my childhood of a 40s deco-era kitchen. I could picture the linoleum on the floor of that kitchen and was hoping to find a reasonable facsimile to use on the sculpture's waist-high section. In a eureka moment, I remembered that the floor of a small closet in my present 1920s home had a similar linoleum. I managed to clean and salvage enough for this piece. Apron 5 was planned after I saw the clothes mannequin at the Met Fashion Institute. It initiated the geometric shapes, especially the area nearest the floor. I found the plastic mesh material in a hobby-type store. The material only came in small sheets, so I had to stitch them together. But the stitching became an important decorative element. My initial plan was to encircle the outer area with a material, but I realized how much I liked the outside ziggurat shape, and so I chose not to cover it. The source was a 1940s woman's apron with 2 rows of large, soft pockets. My choice of materials, aluminum and leather, and the delineated shapes transformed the flouncy, feminine garment into a highly structured, more masculine version of the original source. On the left is a full-scale drawing of the curved aluminum sections. It was used as a template to help accurately shape each section. My bib white, my source for this piece was the X-ray bib on my dentist's office wall. I liked the shape. I chose a transparent needlepoint mesh material in order to see through to the structure underneath, which is a hanger from an antique steamer trunk. I like the idea that the transparency of the mesh material suggests the function of the X-ray, but at the same time, it contradicts and denies the protective function of the heavy original bib. On the left is a pattern that I used, again, to help me construct the piece. And it's full scale, and if the white material was not attached to the aluminum bars, or excuse me, rods that encircle the piece, then it would be flattened out and it would look just like this pattern. I had trouble deciding how to place bib dots. It was too small to be directly on the floor. I wanted it viewed at eye level, but not placed directly on the wall. I was thinking of a shelf when I happened to see an exhibit of Betty Woodman's large ceramic work. Her shelves, each one shaped to relate to a particular ceramic piece, really excited me. I was also very interested in how she integrated 2D backgrounds with 3D elements. At this time, I was researching ideas for a project where I would combine 2D and 3D. During that same New York trip, as I was focusing on Art Deco design, I saw this subway gate and sign. The shapes became the source for Vest Red Gray, and for that same project I was formulating at the time. Shown is the gray side, and later when you see the project I'm referring to, you'll see the red side. Tunic Folded was a spatial exercise to try to build a structure angled at 45 degrees from the back to the front that would appear as if it was one continuous piece of material, scored and folded. But since I was not scoring and folding a thin sheet of paper, this was to be a large structure made of 3/4 inch thick material, I had to figure out the shape it would take and construct it out of individual sections connected with beveled edges all glued together. So I had to make a model, and this is a model that gave me all the information that I needed. It showed me the shapes of each individual section and the degree of bevel between the sections and also along each edge. The shapes of the top and bottom sections of yoke are intertwined. One could not exist without the other. They were planned together in the drawing stage. The scale is exaggerated, so it confronts the viewer directly and helps to remove it from too literal a connection to the source. The shape of a large collar and a pagoda roof shape were intertwined in my mind as I planned this. These two subjects both serve protective functions as coverings, though on a different scale, so I liked combining them in the title. The collar roof area is linoleum. The stand is made of painted aluminum over wood. I reversed my process when I planned shawl. I drew the idea for the top section based on the already existing stool base. I embossed the aluminum by placing it over a metal grid and running it through an etching press. The biggest challenge here with this piece was forming the aluminum section as one uninterrupted shape. The base of this stool was I found, actually bought it from a place in Chicago that buys industrial objects from businesses or institutions that go out of business. This particular stool base came from an operating room in a hospital. I'm currently working on a group of sculptures related to peplums. As you can see from the source image, a peplum is an added layer of material attached to the waste. The drawing explains the construction. The scored and shaped section, shown flattened out in the drawing, is attached to the front and left side of a wood structure. The folded form is made of layers of black Tyvek covered with gessoed linen, which has been colored with crayon. I will conclude with the project that was on my mind during that New York trip in 2006. I installed window dressing in 2007 in the 6 large windows of the Racine Art Museum in Racine, Wisconsin. It was to remain in the windows for a year with some kind of alteration mid-year. I titled it Window Dressing. The idea was to pay homage to the window dressers and their window designs of the Art Deco period in the late 1920s. Preparation involved research, finding new materials, and making precise 1/8 scale models. It was challenging but also fun, especially working on a new, larger scale. The idea came from a book I had found at a used book sale called Merchant's Record and Show Window. It was a compilation of monthly trade journals from 1927, Ideas for Window Dressers. Inside this journal was an ad for a book called The Manual of Show Window Backgrounds by E.O. Burge. I located this manual in the basement of the Creer Library at the University of Chicago. I spent many happy hours there photocopying some amazing material on window displays. Some I directly applied to this project. My goal for this project was to achieve a seamless juxtaposition of each background with its particular sculpture. The installation would have 2 iterations. For the first round, each background was designed for a specific existing sculpture. At mid-year, I reinstalled, substituting newly made sculptures for the already existing backgrounds. This first window shows the background, a small background, with a piece called bib brass. Then for the second version, I did another piece for that same background called Bib Doodle. This is the second window, first version. It's got a bowler piece. That same bowler I originally had made in 4 sections, but just used it for the windows in 2 sections because of the depth of the window. This is the second version of window 2, where the same piece, I took it off the shelf and used it in this way. Third window was with a piece called Pinafore. And the background area, you can also see the sort of the influence I had from looking at the subway gate in New York. The wallpaper I found on the internet, a New York store that carried vintage wallpaper and linoleum. And they showed many different samples of patterns. I found this paper. It was actually a paper from around 1928, and with the same kind of geometric pattern as that linoleum. And so I ordered it. And I was very nervous about applying it because it was very dry and brittle. So I asked around until I've learned about a really good person to apply wallpaper. and he was nervous too, and he decided that the best thing would be to wet the background of the paper before he applied the paste. And as soon as he did that, everything ran, all the ink just ran down. At that time, evidently, they did not have inks that were waterproof, that were permanent. So my heart sank, and I didn't know if I would be able to find more of that same paper, but luckily they did have more rolls, and luckily my budget was big enough so that I could get 2 more rolls. I think they were about $200 a roll. Here is the same background with vest red gray, and now you're seeing it on the red side. This would be window 4. I wanted to use this piece, Apron 6, which has a sort of feeling of a kimono Asian feel to it. And so the background with the circle and with that wallpaper, it just felt like they really worked together so well that I didn't plan another piece for this group, for this window, and just, for the whole year I kept it this way. And this piece is another apron, and the background all of these backgrounds were made with 3 sections. In this case, for the second version, I removed the middle section and did used different materials in different colors for this apron, another apron 1. The last window actually looked into the museum. So the other windows had a opaque glass background, so you didn't look into the museum. In this case, though, you did see into the museum, and it was very black, something I had not anticipated. And I had initially been looking at this piece against a white wall, and most of it was, very many of the elements in this were black, and so they just disappeared against the black background. So I did an all-nighter, and I brought all this back to my studio and painted some turquoise areas, and the middle frame was open before and black, and it just disappeared, so I filled it and also painted it turquoise. So that was kind of a traumatic moment. The other view of this I don't have a good slide for. There were two images that I didn't come up here. So I'm just going to go back and see if I can find them, because there are 2 pieces that I wanted to talk about, but they sort of disappeared. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go really fast and see where I lost them. There they are. Great. Okay, now I got to find my notes. Okay, let's see. Excuse me. 1 minute. Okay, this piece is called Amish Bonnet. I chose brass tubing for this asymmetrical grid construction. I considered taking a welding class in order to connect the tubes, but I realized that the connections should not be hidden, but emphasized. So for each intersection, I flattened both tubes, crimping them with pliers and wrapping them with colored waxed cords. This functional solution introduced an automatic decorative element to the piece. With Mesh Bonnet, I was thinking of the way 2 sections of an embroidery hoop snugly tightens and contains a piece of cloth. In this case, the cloth is cotton, needlepoint mesh, and the wood strips are standard wood molding called bead molding, You can find it in any lumber yard. I carved the corner sections to mimic the form of the molding. The 90-degree grid pattern of the mesh dictated the form, not allowing me to apply my former angled orientation. Anyway, that's it. And I'm under my time. If any of you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Hi, Diane. Over here. You're such a craftsman. I'm over here, Diane. I will. So you kind of answered this a little bit already, but one of the things I'm curious about, so you started out as a painter drawer and a printmaker.
I can't hear you.
You started out as a painter drawer and printmaker, and then you went into these cardboard constructions. And then you went into wood and metal and brass and fabric. And I'm just wondering, how did you take on those new skills? Are you completely self-taught with joinery techniques with wood? How did you figure out how to work with metal? You talked about maybe wanting to take a welding class and then deciding against that. I'm just wondering, where did you grab all the rest of those beautifully crafted skills from?
I'm completely self-taught when it comes to the skills that I need to make a three-dimensional form. And I've learned it all on my own, and the hard way, trial and error. And in some ways, not having all the, I mean, I wish I did have more of these skills, but in some ways, it's almost advantageous because I have to figure out my own way to do it, which ends up being a sometimes strange, but maybe more original solution. But you know, my background in painting and drawing really carries over into my decisions that I make with the sculpture. It's the same formal concerns, you know, of balance and finding interesting shapes, negative, positive, all the things that you think about when you're doing paintings, drawings and paintings really are true for sculpture. So I rely on all those decisions. But when it comes to materials, it's really all, I think that it's a struggle, but it's also fun. And maybe it's because of those limitations, I find materials that are not typical sculpture materials. But I mean, in terms of the woodworking, like I said, I had initially just worked with a jigsaw. And first, when I was using cardboard, I just used a knife edge blade. And then once I started with wood, I was relying on the jigsaw and a router, because a lot of these pieces, because they're angled, the edges are also angled at a 45 degree. And there's a router tool called a chamfer bit, and that would be the tool that I would use. This handheld router would angle those edges. And then gradually I found, like, mostly used tools, but I bought a table saw and a bandsaw and a drill press. So I feel like a real carpenter now, but you know, but like that metal that I had to bend for the apron, I just find my own ways of doing it. They're kind of Rube Goldberg tricks that I find.
And is your studio still in your garage?
Where are you?
It's right here.
Huh?
And
Lynn.
And is your studio still in your garage?
Yes, it is. It's heated. The garage is not attached to the house. It's behind the yard, and we just brought a gas line out there and heated it. And my whole family helped put up drywall, and it was kind of fun. And then I was so anxious to get to work that I never painted the drywall, so it's really awful. But it's really been a cozy place to work. And I like the idea that I don't have to travel, I don't have to pay rent for a studio, and I can come and go. I can go back to my house and do the laundry and come back. I mean, it's just like a real convenient thing. Over here. Yeah, Tony?
What about, it seems to me that at the certainly at the initial stages of your career, you, though not quite as fetish, you might have had some interests shared with Christina Ramberg. Is
Yeah.
that, do you own up to that?
Oh, I definitely own up to that. The question was, did I know Christina, or did I?
Well, did you work with her? Did you share interests with her?
I admired Christina's work very much, and I went to Phyllis Kynes' gallery and looked at her work a lot. And we knew each other, not real well, but we knew each other a little bit, but we never talked about our work. But I responded to her work very much. And just recently, I showed an image from a book that shows clothing and objects, through several centuries. I was looking at a catalog of Christina's that was at the University of Illinois, UIC. I think that Judith Kirshner curated, and it was all of Christina's, mainly her drawings. And I got the catalog, and just recently I was looking at that catalog, and I found in that catalog was mainly her drawings and little notes about all sorts of things. She kept very neatly written notes. And in that catalog, there was one page where she must have been doing some research at the Ryerson Library, I would guess, and she found that same set of books. It's 10 volumes of amazing images. She found the same set of books in Ryerson and made notes of which pages she liked. And they were the same pages that I liked. I mean, it was incredible. And then she also did a drawing of on that same page, she did a drawing of a Japanese headdress. And it's one of the forms that is so meaningful to me. So we definitely were on the same wavelength. Yeah.
I'm curious to know about the timing of your success. Did you make all these sculptures and keep them hanging out in your dining room, ready to show to a gallery, or how did that work?
Well, my first show, was at Artemisia, and I showed those cardboard pieces. And then soon after, I started MDF and went into the garage. And I have a nice big house, so my storage for this work over 35 years is all over my house. I'm still in the same house over 48 years. And I use the attic because there's a pretty nice big room that's heated, finished room on the third floor. That's my main storage. And then I also have worked at times in the basement, and I also store work there because I used to do printmaking on my own. There were all these periods in between when I was in school where I worked on my own. And one of those periods, I concentrated on printmaking. And so there's a big press down there, and there's big tables. And I use, at this point, my children are not living at home. And so I use every bedroom for storage, except the one we use to sleep in. And so I'm not sure I remember your question. What was it?
No, you answered it, yeah.
Pardon?
You answered it. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering how you named your pieces.
Good question. That's a good question. I really have a struggle naming pieces. And so most of the time I just rely on kind of naming them according to a category of a subject that I'm interested in, like the aprons, let's say. Sometimes I don't really want to get into any poetic, titles. Sometimes it'll have something to do with the process or a particular quality, particular something that describes the piece. But most of the time it has to do with my source. If I'm looking at bonnets, it'll relate to bonnets or headdress or aprons or bibs or collars. So I'm not very, I've noticed that young people now, I think it's mostly young, a current trend in titling. The titles are so crazy that you can't figure out what it has to do with the work. And I've talked to some people about that, and how did you name it that way? And I remember somebody telling me, she just picks out something from a book. It's really not about the piece at all. So my titles are very, very difficult to choose because I don't want to give away, I don't want to direct the viewer too much. I want them to come to the piece with their own ideas. But at the same time, some of the work gets so removed from the source that I want to bring it back. And so it depends on how abstract the piece is, if I want to bring it back to the source, or if it is pretty obvious, I don't want to name it that same name and keep it kind of a guess.
Hi, Diane.
Hi.
That was great, wonderful. Thank you so much. So you're fun to see the image of you at Artemisia, and my question has to do with the fact that your alma mater is 70% women. Over 70% of the students at the School of the Art Institute are women.
70?
Over 70%. Mm-hmm. And you've had this rich career, and yet, as we have been reading in the newspapers of late, there's still this inequity in the art world when it comes to representing women. And certainly Artemisia Gallery was a women-run gallery intended to address the situation back in the 70s. Can you say something about your work in relation to this complicated issue in terms of a feminist trajectory? Can you talk about being a woman artist?
You mean how it has affected me, or what I think about the whole phenomena of women's careers and their...
Yeah.
Well, I think we all agree that women have not gotten their due, and only recently has there been a little bit of an improvement in that way, in that more women are being recognized. I also noticed that so many women have become curators in museums and or writers, I think that that's really great because I think that's helped also. But there's still a long way to go. When I joined Artemisia, it wasn't really because so much as that I was a feminist. It was more that it was an opportunity to get back into the world of art because I had been working on my own, and I knew nothing about the outside art world. And But most of the women who were there, unfortunately, many of them were not having happy marriages because their husbands did not respect what they were doing, and so that was another issue at that time. I hope that's improved. But in terms of the careers of women, I agree that there has to be something to balance that imbalance. And I think hopefully I don't know how young people feel in general, but I've talked to some and they're angry. They're still angry. Many young artists feel like they're not getting, being recognized as much as their male counterparts. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Diane. You have such a wonderful grasp and sensitivity to materials, many kinds of materials. And I remember, first of all, the wonderful cardboard you used and how you took that mundane but strong material and made magic from it. Do you have a nostalgia with materials or a material?
A nostalgia?
Yes. Do you find...
Well, I mean, I mentioned that this, like linoleum, when I was looking for linoleum for the windows, that I discovered this wonderful material that's actually made now called marmoleum. And they had all of these the thing that I liked was because the patterns reminded me of earlier linoleum. Both the material is made like the old linoleum, but the patterns were really like some patterns from the 20s and 30s. But in terms of other materials, I don't have did you say a nostalgia? Or
the way you used the cardboard when I first saw your work, I thought it was making the most out of the least, even though it was a heavy industrial cardboard. And then the subtle drawing with the crayon or graphite over it. It was just wonderful. But do you find that you're nostalgic for something so simple as that? Or obviously the form chooses the material that you want to...
Yeah, I think that...
to answer your problem.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of using materials that somebody can relate to on a very personal, everyday level. And so I think that's why I like the cardboard or any of these materials that you associate with crafts, let's say, or things that you have had some experience with in your life. And it also is a contrast to the very architectural forms that I use. So it softens them and it brings them into the more domestic realm. I think, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Domesticity seems to be your big, your main theme here. Is that? Would you say it's a theme that runs through all your work?
Well, it's a theme because it counterbalances the architectonic in the work. Both my source and the structures become very architectonic, and to bring them back into a more domestic realm. Yes, I'm interested in both of those worlds and how you can see both in a piece. One balances the other. And also because the source is actually clothing, especially I want to bring it back in a little bit, in a way, to that subject.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question.
I hope you will all go to the MCA if you haven't already. Lynn Warren is here. I want to really feel grateful for having the opportunity to do this project. And the thing about the MCA show is that I have a large table where we've displayed the source material, which I find very exciting, and that was never shown before. Besides, you can see the work without the windows in between you, so you get more of an immediate kind of feeling.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you all.
Thank you.